They laughed, and they laughed hard. They laughed as if they were watching a joke unfold, as if the old man sitting in the corner of the table was just some decorative detail. No one there expected that this frail old man with a calm expression and steady hands was about to give the most unsettling lesson of the night. The champions at the table, the ones from the media, the YouTube videos, the profiles loaded with followers, spoke loudly, exchanged mocking glances, tossed chips like they were on a stage not playing a game. And the old man? He barely spoke. He just watched, observed, and held his cards like someone holding a secret. One of those secrets that changes everything when revealed. The truth is, no one there was ready for this. The crowd in the hall, the overconfident opponents, the dealer with a tired look. Everyone underestimated him because appearances deceived, and how they deceived. The first reaction of anyone seeing him there was almost automatic. He's just here for fun. It was easy to think that way. After all, when you see a wrinkled face and a demeanor so calm, it's almost instinctive to assume there's no energy, no drive, no game. What was really missing was humility from the others. And in the end, that cost them dearly. Because in the hand that mattered, when everyone thought he'd fold, he called. But he didn't just call the bet. He paid for their collective arrogance with the coin of elegant humiliation. A simple move, clean, technical, lethal, and that's where the real game begins. Because we tend to believe poker is only for the flashy ones, the young, the loud. But what about when silence wins? When experience, the kind that's accumulated quietly, without a stage, without a spotlight, shows that intelligence has no age and that reading people isn't something you learn in an online course. What happened that night, at that table, in particular, wasn't just a move. It was a lesson, a classy slap to the shallow logic of those who live for appearances. And you know, it wasn't the first time he flipped the game, but that night, it was the most cinematic. And it all started with the quiet gaze of someone who had seen way more than all of them put together could ever imagine. Before the epic move, before the looks of admiration and the silent respect that only well-played poker demands. Before the cameras and the rumors that that old man is tough, there was an invisible man. Invisible not for lack of presence, but for too much simplicity. A man named Zeka. His hair thinning, a shy mustache, always pressed clothes that seemed to have been carefully stored for years, and a smile of someone who had seen the world go around in circles more than once. Zeka was the kind of guy who enters a place and no one notices. But if you sat down to talk with him, you'd quickly realize, inside that quiet exterior lived a sharp mind, sharp like a razor left forgotten in a drawer. The kind that only cuts when it has to. Zeka was retired. He worked as a clerk in a government office in the countryside. One of those guys who always showed up on time, knew everyone's name, and brought an extra cup of coffee just to share. 40 years spent in a routine no one valued, but that kept the town running. When he retired, he didn't cry or throw a party. He just thanked them and went home a little earlier that day. He didn't know what would come next. He just knew that now, the time was all his. And that's when he reconnected with old friends, picked up old habits, and made the local club his second home. A place that smelled of polished wood, worn tables, plastic chips, and genuine laughter. No luxury, but there, Zeka was happy. The games took place every Thursday night. It was almost sacred. The old god friends would gather in the back room, each with their own peculiar way of bluffing. There was Tonino, who kept winking non-stop, Joel, who couldn't hold back his laughter, and Carlo, who snorted like a bull whenever he bluffed. Zeka. Zeka played quietly, observed more than he spoke. And even so, no one took him seriously. The truth is, to many of them, he was just the table filler. The guy who was there to chat, to make up numbers, to keep the mood light. No one, absolutely no one, saw him as a threat. Maybe that's why he played so calmly. There were no expectations, and where there are no expectations, there is freedom. But there's something curious about human nature. The more underestimated someone is, the more dangerous they can become. Not out of revenge, but because of accumulated insight. Zeka began to understand this through the subtleties of the conversations, the micro-reactions of his peers. Over time, he noticed patterns, repetition of habits, movements that betrayed intentions. While some tried to win the round, he tried to understand the mind behind the bet. And that's not something you learn quickly. It's something built slowly, like putting together a 1,000-piece puzzle without a reference image. The kind of skill that doesn't get attention, but builds legends. And still, he never positioned himself as someone who knew more. He kept his soft demeanor, his quiet voice, his games fueled by lukewarm coffee and patience. Zeka wasn't in a hurry. In fact, hurry was something he had left behind, along with the deadlines at the office. Today, he tended to time like someone tends a garden. And that's why his demeanor at the table always stood out. While others gestured wildly, huffed and pressured, he remained serene, like a lake in the middle of a storm. This calm annoyed some, amused others, and went unnoticed by most. And that majority, by the way, is the same group that now tells stories about that insane move no one saw coming. But that was later. Back then, he was just Zeka. An old man who seemed out of place but was, in fact, the only one truly present. If you stop to think, how many people like that pass us by every day? Quiet people who don't show off, who don't impose themselves, who don't shout. People who observe, who listen more than they speak, who have a silent intelligence, the kind that doesn't seek approval. Society, unfortunately, still measures worth by decibels, likes, or appearances. But real worth, the kind that doesn't bend, with time, almost always comes wrapped in silence and discretion. Zeka was exactly that, a poorly wrapped gift. And like every gift like that, only the attentive ones have the privilege of opening it. And inside, my friend, inside was a game that few were prepared to face. And the most fascinating part is that Zeka never sought to impress. He didn't want the spotlight. He didn't want the trophy. He played for the pleasure of being there, for the connection, for the mental challenge, for the nostalgia of old times when logical thinking was still more important than the persona you build. Online, he never said this outright, but you could feel it. His gaze spoke. And the gaze of someone who's lived a lot carries nuances that the youth hasn't even begun to understand. Maybe that's why they underestimated him so much. No one expected such a sharp mind to be inside a body society insists on calling old. But those who underestimate time end up learning from it, and usually the hard way. It was in this context, in this simple life filled with small rituals, that Zeka built his arsenal. An invisible arsenal made of reading, memory, patience, and analysis. And even without knowing it, he was preparing himself. Like a warrior training without imagining he would ever go to war. And when the opportunity came, disguised as an innocent invitation to a bigger tournament, he went. no pose. No fanfare, not even knowing he was about to deliver the biggest psychological check raise of the night. But that's a story for the next chapter. Zika never imagined that poker, that card game he used to watch from a distance and never dared to get into, would become a passion that would change the course of his life. But, as he always said, life is a big poker game, and the real play often happens when you least expect it. And that's exactly what happened. It was a simple invitation, a get-together with old friends, that pulled him into the world of cards and bets. It all started like many good things in life in an unpretentious way. On any given Sunday with no rush, Zeka was, as usual, sitting on the porch of his house, watching the activity in the neighborhood square. The sun was low, the heat was mild, the perfect setting for his peaceful routine. That's when Toninho, the longtime friend, showed up. "Zika, come over to the bar and play some cards with us, just for fun. Nothing serious, just to pass the time," he invited, with that mischievous smile. The kind of smile that knows it can be persuasive, but doesn't push too hard. Zika hesitated. He wasn't one to go out much these days, and poker was something he only saw on TV, never really having an interest. But something in that invitation, something in the casual way Toninho spoke, made him think, why not? Just for fun, Zeka thought. And there's nothing wrong with learning something new. And somehow, at that moment, he knew it wasn't just the game that attracted him, but the mental challenge itself. Zeka had always been someone who liked to understand the things behind what he saw, and poker, with its strategy and psychological reading, seemed like the kind of game that demanded more than just luck. Something he had always sought in life. The mind, he thought, was always the greatest asset anyone could have. And no matter how simple that gathering seemed, something told him it would be the start of a deeper journey. When he arrived at the bar, the atmosphere was different from what he expected. The simple, welcoming environment, with beaten wooden tables and metal chairs, was filled with casual conversations and laughter. The voices were loud, almost the opposite of Zeka's tranquility. He sat down at the table with the other players, all younger, more excited. His first impression was that he was in unfamiliar territory, but it didn't intimidate him. The noise, the jokes, all of it seemed so far removed from the life he led, yet here he was, ready to learn. Well, since I'm here, I'll try to figure out the game, Zeka thought, with a quiet laugh. He didn't know anything about poker, the terms, the rules, the types of hands. But as he had always done in his life, he was willing to learn without rush. And it was there, in those first few hands, that he discovered how fascinating poker could be. Not for the excitement of the bets, but for the mental game. He began observing the reactions of the other players, each with their own signs and gestures, and soon realized that there was much more happening than met the eye. In the first few minutes, Zeka was almost a spectator. He didn't bet big, didn't bluff much. He was just there, watching, absorbing every movement, trying to understand what was behind those cards. But at the same time, he felt the growing pressure to fit in with the group. They probably think I'm a fool that I don't know how to play, he thought. But he didn't care what they thought of him. His focus was on absorbing what was happening around him and, more importantly, learning to read the players. It was a mental experiment, a challenge for his own mind, and that was enough to keep him in the game. The truth is, for Zeka, poker wasn't just about beating the others. It was about understanding how the human mind works under pressure. He started to realize that bluffing wasn't just about hiding a bad card, but about manipulating others' perceptions, influencing their decisions without them even realizing. And of course, he loved the idea that, in poker, no one knew exactly what the other was thinking. Every player, even in silence, was playing a game of minds. And Zika, with his life experience and his keen reading of people, was ready to become a master at this art. The first few days were a mix of frustration and small victories. He lost many hands, but unlike others, he didn't let it get to him. He took note of everything that happened, everything the others did. If he made a mistake, he didn't blame himself. He studied the mistake, and over time he began to feel that something was changing. The game stopped being just fun and became a mental exercise. Zika found himself getting more and more immersed in this world of cards and bets. Not because he wanted to be the best, but because he wanted to understand more. He started watching poker videos, reading books, following specialized blogs. He was diving into what could be a new passion, a new journey. And the most interesting part, he wasn't chasing immediate success, but working to deepen his understanding of the game and people. Over time, people began to notice that the old Zika wasn't the same anymore. He was no longer just the guy who was there to fill the table. No, he had become someone who truly understood what was happening at the table. He started winning some hands, but more importantly, he began reading the players with a precision that surprised everyone. He could feel when someone was bluffing, when someone was afraid to bet, or when someone was trying to push him into making a mistake. This skill of reading people began to set him apart. He was getting in tune with the game in a way no one expected. Zika, however, never bragged about his victories. His pleasure was in the learning, in the process. Poker, for me, is more than a game of luck, he thought. It's a game of the mind, and the greatest bluff you can give is believing you don't need to learn more. He knew the path was long, and that success would only come with patience and dedication. But unlike other players, who were driven by ego and emotion, Zika remained centered. He wasn't chasing fame, but excellence. And that, more than anything else, prepared him for what was to come. In those first months, Zika realized there was a transformation in his own behavior. He became more observant, more calm, more analytical. The games were no longer just about cards. They were about emotions, reading the table, controlling the tension. And it was this emotional control, the ability to stay calm while the game around him seemed to grow more intense, that would become the foundation for his future big move. He didn't care about winning, but about the lessons each hand brought him. Now Zika knew. Poker wasn't just a card game. It was a metaphor for life, a daily lesson on the importance of patience, observation, and discipline. And so, without rush, he continued on his path. He knew that what was about to happen, at that table and many others, was just a matter of time. And that time, he knew, would be used for one more great lesson. Zika was used to being patient. Life, with its ups and downs, had already taught him that failure isn't the end, but a starting point. However, in the world of poker, the experience of failing was different. It wasn't just a simple loss of chips. It was an emotional roller coaster that pushed him to the edge of his patience. Deep down, Zika knew that beating the other players wasn't the only goal. The real challenge was to beat himself. But up until that point, he was far from understanding this lesson in practice. In the first few months of playing poker, Zika experienced a series of failures that left a deep mark on him. Each loss felt heavier than the last, and no matter how hard he tried not to let it affect him, frustration and insecurity began to take hold of his mind. Every time he sat down at the table and the chips started to be dealt, He felt like his confidence was a house of cards about to collapse. The big lesson he still didn't understand was that, in poker, failure was a crucial part of the learning process. Zika wasn't just learning to read the cards or the opponents, he was learning to handle the emotional tension of being constantly challenged to overcome his own shortcomings. What bothered Zika the most was that, no matter how much he studied and dedicated himself, the results still weren't showing. He had read books, watched videos, practiced for hours. Even so, the game always seemed faster and more unpredictable than he could imagine. And the worst part was that, in the games where he thought he had figured out the strategy, something always went wrong. He lost with seemingly strong hands, made bad bets, or simply couldn't control his nerves. His friends, although not intentionally, often made fun of him. Joel, the guy with the easy laugh, would always joke about how Zika was teaching people how to lose. Carlone, on the other hand, would put on a show of bold bluffs, always challenging Zika to react. Those jokes at first were just light-hearted. Over time, however, they started to hurt. Zika spent his nights thinking about the jokes and the laughter. Did he really not have the skill for the game? In one of those moments of frustration, Zika realized that perhaps what bothered him most wasn't losing the chips or being seen as an amateur. What really affected him was the fear of failing in front of himself. After all, as someone who took pride in his sharp mind and his ability to learn from experience, what would happen if he couldn't prove he was capable? It was a deep dilemma. The poker game was, little by little, becoming more than just a pastime. He was putting something more important on the line, his own identity. And the possibility of failing wasn't a simple matter. All that dedication, all that studying, all those efforts were now being tested. Then in one game, Zika made the decision he would later call the worst bet of his life. He was playing with a seemingly good hand, and his chips had dwindled significantly. Nervousness mixed with the temptation to make a decisive move to show that he could play too. So, without thinking through the consequences, Zeka made a big bet. He bet everything he had, without properly analyzing the behavior of the other players. What he didn't realize was that everyone around him had stronger hands, and his big bet was seen as an invitation for others to exploit his insecurity. They called, and the game turned against him. Zeka lost everything. Each chip slid away from him like it was a nightmare. He couldn't believe what he had done. Why was I so impulsive? He thought. The feeling of defeat was overwhelming, more than anything he had ever experienced. Losing a large amount of chips wasn't as painful as what he felt in that moment. The weight of a deep, painful failure that couldn't be erased. But amid the pain, Zeka learned something crucial. He learned that poker wasn't just about winning. It was about understanding his own limits. That moment of extreme loss made him reflect on what truly mattered. He realized that the game, like life, wasn't linear. It was full of ups and downs. And more importantly, it wasn't just about knowing when to bet or when to fold, but about learning to deal with his own failures and limitations. That moment of frustration, which initially seemed like his ruin, began to transform into the key to his evolution. He knew that, to win, he couldn't just rely on his technical skills. He needed to work on his mind, learn to control his emotions, and handle the pressure. In the days that followed, Zeka began to reflect even more on his failures. But instead of letting shame or anger consume him, he chose to use that time to really learn. He began to take notes on everything that happened in the games, not just the hands he played, but also how he felt emotionally during the game. He started questioning himself. Why did I make that move? What led me to bet everything on that hand? He started observing himself with a more critical and patient eye. This didn't happen overnight, of course. There were nights when frustration still took over, and he wondered if he would ever be good enough for poker. But on other nights, he felt the change was beginning to happen. He was becoming calmer, more calculated, more aware of his mistakes. It was in this tough phase that Zeka understood the true nature of poker. The game wasn't just about winning or losing. It was about knowing how to handle failure. It was about learning to get back up after every fall, understanding what went wrong and doing better next time. Every hand he lost became an opportunity for learning. Each defeat brought him closer to his true evolution. Poker, more than any other game, required the greatest skill, emotional control, and that's what Zeka began to cultivate. He knew that, as long as the game was driven by the mind and patience, he could go very far. And more importantly, he knew his journey was far from over. But the road would be long and full of challenges. Zeka was only beginning to understand the depth of poker and how this game would force him to grow not only as a player, but as a person. He was learning, in a difficult and often painful way, that failure wasn't something to fear, but something to understand. And more than anything, he was starting to grasp the big lesson. Defeat doesn't define who you are. What truly defines you is how you respond to it. Zeka had always believed that life is about choices. When he found himself lost in a sea of defeats at poker, it felt like life was pushing him to a turning point, forcing him to decide, give up or keep going, learning from each failure, striving for constant improvement. The decision to not give up was, in a way, the hardest he had ever made. Not because he doubted his abilities, but because failure, the pain of loss, was becoming an unbearable weight. And he knew that to move forward, he would need to confront his own mind, overcome frustration, and find strength where he thought none existed. At that moment, Zeka realized something crucial. He wasn't playing poker just to win chips anymore, but to discover more about himself. The feeling of failing repeatedly was creating immense emotional tension. But, at the same time, it was giving him an opportunity to learn how to deal with adversity. That discomfort, that knot in his chest that appeared every time he lost a hand was a clear signal that he needed to transform the pain into something positive. He started to realize that, to evolve in poker, he needed to focus more on emotional control than on the cards themselves. Success didn't come just from good hands, but from the ability to stay calm, to read the table and the opponents, to control his impulses and frustrations. The process of self-discovery wasn't easy. With every defeat, Zeka felt his confidence being tested. He spent sleepless nights reflecting on what had gone wrong, how he could have played differently, and most importantly, what he could learn from each failure. He became obsessed with reviewing every move. He rewatched his games, took notes on every possible detail, and questioned himself about every decision. Where did I go wrong? He asked, not just about the hands he lost, but about the emotions that overtook him at the moment of decision. This process of reflection, although painful, helped him mature much faster. Zeka started to understand that poker wasn't just a card game. It was a game of minds, a psychological battlefield where patience and reading others were more important than the value of the cards. Every time he failed, he realized he was actually getting closer to understanding the game on a deeper level. The secret wasn't just in betting strategies or perfect hands. The real secret was in controlling the mind and understanding what was going on inside him and inside the heads of his opponents. For him, poker became a metaphor for life. No matter how many times you fall, what matters is how you get back up. One of the biggest changes Zeka experienced was his new approach to losses. He learned not to let anger or frustration consume him. Before, a loss would leave him anxious, with the feeling that he was failing irreversibly. Now he allowed himself to learn from the loss. He understood that mistakes were part of the process and that he should use them as fuel to improve. He started to see each lost hand as an opportunity to improve his skills, to adjust his strategy, to work on his weaknesses. Zeka's biggest challenge, however, was controlling his anxiety. In the early days, he felt like his mind was betraying him every second of pressure. He was always worried about what others thought of him, the possibility of losing more chips, the fear of becoming the target of more jokes. But he understood that, to win at poker and in life, he could no longer worry about others' opinions. He needed to focus on his own game, on what he could control, without being distracted by external emotions. And it was with this renewed mindset that Zeka began to take his first steps in the right direction. He no longer cared what others thought. He cared about his personal growth. Time passed, and Zeka began to feel more comfortable in his own skin. More and more, he became more observant and less reactive. He didn't rush into bets. He thought before acting, analyzed his opponent's reactions, looked for facial expressions, gestures, and small clues that could make all the difference. Gradually, the other player's confidence in his skill began to grow. The Zeka of the IG past, that calm and discreet guy, was now seen differently. He was no longer the newbie who didn't know what he was doing. He was the player who knew when to fold and when to go for it, the player who wasn't easily shaken by the pressures of the game. But don't be fooled. Zeka's journey was still far from easy. He was still far from being the tournament champion, but something had changed within him. He had transformed his view of poker and of life. He now understood that the real victory wasn't in the chips, but in the constant process of learning, in the ability to reinvent himself with each fall. With every defeat, he grew stronger. With every mistake, he became wiser. The player hesitated for a few more seconds before finally calling the bet. What happened next was a surprise to everyone. Zeka didn't have a strong hand, but he had something the others didn't, the perfect read on the game. He knew that. Player was bluffing, and by calling the bet, he was putting everyone in a vulnerable position. Unlike previous moments of failure, Zeka remained calm. He knew this was the turning point. His decision was shaping the outcome of the tournament. And when the final cards were revealed, it was Zeka who won that decisive hand. He had read the bluff, made the right decision, and against all expectations, turned the game in his favor. The silence in the room was deafening. Those champions, those young players who had underestimated him throughout the tournament, were now hanging their heads, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Zeka. He just smiled, organized his chips, and said, "Nice hand, huh?" That simple sentence, loaded with profound meaning, was the signal that Zeka had won. Not just that hand, but the whole game and his perception of himself. He had given everyone a lesson. Experience, patience, and keen observation are more powerful than haste and arrogance. That tournament, which seemed impossible for a player of his age and experience, was now turning in his favor. The champions lowered their heads. They could no longer deny Zeka's talent. He had become the center of attention, no longer as a joke, but as a true threat. The old man, the quiet one, the underestimated one, was now seen as a real challenge. But the most impressive thing was Zeka's calm smile. He knew the battle wasn't over yet. But what mattered in that moment was that he had made the first big strike. The turnaround had only just begun, and he knew that more than ever, he was playing to win. The silence in the room was the first thing Zeka noticed. After the loud clatter of chips hitting the table, the nervous murmurs of the players, and the weight of the bets with every move, there was something incredibly peaceful in that moment, as if time had slowed down, and he was the only one in the universe still breathing. But contrary to what it might seem, he wasn't relaxed or in a state of ecstasy. No, Zeka was simply calm. He knew that silence, that brief pause, was all he needed. The game, at its core, wasn't just about the cards, it wasn't about the fleeting victories. It was about the transformation happening right there, one that everyone was about to witness. The champions, those confident players who had laughed at Zeka in the first round, now found themselves in an uncomfortable position. They, who had underestimated the quiet old man who seemed to not understand the game, were now with their heads down, unsure of how to react. Zeka could see it in their eyes, the mix of surprise and shame. They were thinking, how did he do it? The feeling of humiliation didn't come just from losing that hand, but from the revelation that they had been blind to the true power of the game. Zeka, with his calm and silent posture, showed them that poker wasn't just about risking everything or being impulsive. It was about reading the situation, understanding the psychology behind every move, and maintaining control. He had become the master of the mental game, and that, to the others, was something they could no longer deny. He didn't say a word as the chips piled up in front of him, but inside, something was being transformed. The Zeka who walked into that tournament was a man marked by failures, by jokes, and by the fear of not being good enough. But there, in that moment, with all eyes on him, he felt something new. He felt that victories weren't just about the number of chips, but about how he saw himself. He had transformed. He knew this wasn't just a poker win, it was a personal victory. He had made the right move, not because the game was easy, but because he was now more aware of his strengths and weaknesses. He knew that true strength lay in the mind, and in the absolute control over his emotions. The other players started to move, trying to hide their irritation and surprise. Some tried to keep their composure, but there was a clear sense that the balance of the table had shifted forever. The silent man, the old guy no one gave anything for, had mastered the situation with skill. Zeka wasn't in a hurry. He knew the next move would be crucial, but he wasn't racing to victory. He was there, with his chips organized, waiting, watching. He knew the game didn't end there. In fact, everything was just beginning. Suddenly, one of the players, one of the most experienced and arrogant, looked at him and, with a sigh, said, "Nice move, old man. Didn't expect that from you." The sarcasm was clear, but there was something more behind her words. Respect. Zeka wasn't shaken. He just looked at her and smiled, gently. He didn't need to say anything. His victory was already there, in the way he carried it. Everyone else was beginning to realize that he wasn't just any competitor. He was a presence. When the next hand was dealt and the bet started to rise again, Zeka was in his element. He felt the weight of those chips on the table, but he knew that the biggest bet of all was the one he had placed on himself. And, as the game progressed, he solidified his position even further. He knew the others were now seeing him differently, and that, in itself, was a win. Zeka's transformation was no longer just about what he could do in the game. It was about how he had changed his own mindset. At the table, the atmosphere had shifted. The opponents no longer laughed at him. They were now trying to figure out how he thought, what he would do next. Zeka, in turn, wasn't reacting to their moves anymore, but simply observing. He had stopped being just a participant. He had become a silent force to be reckoned with. When the others tried to react with more aggression, Zeka stood firm, never losing his composure. He knew he didn't need to force anything. He knew that when the right moment came, he would take control again. What impressed the most wasn't just his calmness, but his ability to turn a failure into learning and a mistake into a step toward the next victory. He had been underestimated, ridiculed, challenged, but now he was becoming the legend of that table. Not because he wanted to prove something to others, but because he knew that the real triumph was in how he saw himself at that moment. He had conquered himself, and that was more important than any trophy. The next few minutes passed in a blur. The chips kept adding up, the bets kept rising, and Zeka remained there, unmoved, like a rock in the middle of the storm. The game was in his hands. The tournament was nearing its end, and he had already proven more than capable of moving forward. The players around him were starting to look at him differently. They no longer saw him as the old guy at the table. No. They saw him as the master of the mind, someone who knew the right time to act, someone who knew the moment to make the decisive move. They saw him as an equal opponent, someone who had surpassed not just the others, but his own limits. But deep down, Zeka knew that the most important thing wasn't the respect he was now receiving. The most important thing was that finally, he had found his place. He knew that in any tournament, at any poker table, he now had something that put him on equal footing with any champion, control of his own mind. And that, for him, was the real prize. Zeka's victory in that tournament spread like wildfire. Within days, his name, previously unknown outside the intimate circles of his local club, was being talked about by players from all over. More than a winner, Zeka had become a legend. And like every legend, his story was retold and exaggerated with every new retelling. But the essence remained the same. The man no one gave a chance had defeated giants, not by being faster, but by being wiser. He had waited for the right moment, studied the game like no one else, and when the challenge arose, he knew exactly what to do. But, contrary to what many imagined, Zeka wasn't swayed by his sudden fame. He continued to frequent the club, continued to play discreetly with his calm and focused style. He didn't need applause or recognition. For Zeka, the greatest prize wasn't in the chips or the glory of the tournament. The greatest prize was knowing that he had surpassed his own limits, that he had transformed from an ordinary man into an unbeatable poker player, not by luck, but by discipline and a deep understanding of the game. That move, that famous turnaround that left his opponents stunned, was just one part of his journey. Zeka knew that what made him special wasn't the victory itself, but the process he went through to get there. It was the fact that, even as the old guy at the table, he had managed to learn, grow, and reinvent himself. To him, poker was more than a competition. It was a metaphor for life. With every defeat, with every mistake made, Zeka grew stronger. He knew that no matter your age, skill, or how much time you've had in life, a sharp mind always finds its moment. And that was the legacy he left, not just in tournaments, but in the people who began to see him as an example of overcoming. Zeka wasn't the only one who had transformed in that journey. His victory inspired other older players who also saw poker as a pastime, but never dared to compete at higher levels. Slowly, others started taking more risks. They began to believe that if a man of his age, with so many limitations, could go, so far then they could too. He became a symbol for a generation that thought it had already passed its prime. Many who watched him started to understand that there was no limit to those willing to learn, grow, and continue the fight, regardless of age or circumstances. But Zika's impact wasn't just felt at the club or among the local players. His story reached the ears of the young, more aggressive players, those who played in the big tournaments and had been unbeatable in the region. They started talking about Zika with a certain fear, not of his playing style, but of the strategy behind it. They, who had always relied on quick decisions, bold bluffs, and impulsive bets, began to wonder, is there another way to play? Some tried to imitate Zeka's style, adopting a calmer, more calculated approach. Others, however, continued to underestimate him, not realizing that with every attempt, they were feeding the legend even more. It was in this scenario that Zeka, without any intention of being the center of attention, became the great master. He, who had never been in a rush to conquer the world, now found people seeking his opinion, wanting to understand how he thought. He knew he had something to offer, something many couldn't see right away. The true wisdom in poker wasn't in how fast you played, but in the patience with which you waited for the right moment. He had shown, quietly, that the real master of poker isn't the one who plays the fastest, but the one who plays the smartest. He didn't need followers. He didn't want to be seen as a central figure, but what he couldn't avoid was becoming an inspiration, and he did so in a quiet and powerful way. Over the following months, Zika's name became a local legend, and the legend only grew when, with humility, he continued to play in smaller tournaments, at home, with friends, but always giving newcomers a chance, advice, and guidance. He knew poker wasn't just about winning. It was about the journey, about how you transform in the process. What he had to teach was something deeper than simple moves or tricks. He taught resilience. He taught patience. And more than anything, he taught that there's no age to learn, nor to overcome your own fears. Zika didn't become famous like other champions. He wasn't the type of person to have a legion of fans or to be constantly invited to the biggest international tournaments. But that was never his goal. What he left behind as a legacy was far more valuable. He proved that wisdom is the greatest trump in poker, and that, with the right time and focus, anyone can achieve greatness. He showed that it doesn't matter how much time you've lived or how much you've been underestimated. The true game always starts when you decide you're ready to play at the highest level. And so, Zeka continued his life with the same calm, the same discretion, but now carrying something more. He carried the certainty that he had found his place in the game, not just at the poker table, but in life. He knew that, for many, his victory was just a stroke of luck. But for him, it was the confirmation that a sharp mind and patience always win in the end. And this, he knew, was the greatest prize of all. And as his story continued to be told, his legacy of overcoming and wisdom grew, inspiring future generations to never underestimate the power of a quiet player who is always attentive, waiting for the right moment to act. Zeka, the quiet old man, wasn't just a master of poker, he was a master of life. Now that you've followed Zeka's journey, the quiet old man who turned the game around, the question remains, have you ever underestimated someone at the table and regretted it later? Maybe you've had that feeling of, how could I not see this earlier? After a loss. Or maybe it was that moment when you thought you were the master of the game, only to realize later that you were just playing on autopilot, while others, calmer and more observant, were preparing to make the big move. When you let your ego take over, make quick guesses, or feel the pressure of the game, you often forget that the biggest advantage might be exactly where you least expect it. In the person who isn't shouting, who isn't trying to impress, but who is quietly observing everything around them with relentless attention. Zika, with his calmness that impressed everyone, showed us something fundamental. Poker, just like life, isn't about who's the fastest, but who knows how to play. With intelligence, patience, and timing, he didn't make the best move by chance. He knew exactly when to act. He had read his opponents, was in tune with the game, and most importantly, wasn't there to impress anyone. He already knew that what truly matters is the control you have over your own mind and how willing you are to learn. He didn't rush, didn't bet impulsively. He was exactly the opposite of what most players expected of him. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. Now I ask you, what's the craziest move you've ever seen from an amateur? That moment when someone suddenly takes control of the table and surprises everyone with a brilliant, unexpected move? Someone who isn't afraid to fail but dives into the challenge without hesitation. I bet you've seen one of those moments, whether in tournaments, rounds with friends, or even in life. That move that makes everyone stop and think, wow, I never thought they'd do that. These moves, in poker and in life, are often made by those who, just like Zika, don't get fooled by appearances, but are astute enough to wait for the right moment to shine. And what if I told you that the next big champion could be someone like you? Or even better, it could be someone like Zika, the kind of person who was underestimated, ignored, but who, deep down, had the whole game in their hands. Sometimes, it's when you least expect it that the opportunity to show your true strength arises. But the big question is, are you ready to seize your chance when it comes? Are you prepared to make the move that surprises not just others, but yourself as well? Because when the moment to turn the game comes, and it always does, you need to be ready to act. I know you're probably thinking, do I have what it takes to be the next Zika? The truth is, that's the big question. But I'll give you the answer. It's not about having something special. The secret is in making the right choices, knowing when it's time to act and when it's time to observe. Zika, in his simplicity, showed us that the real game isn't about being the fastest or the boldest, but about mastering the mind, being patient, learning from every defeat, and using that to sharpen your skills. It doesn't matter if you're 20, 30, or 60 years old. What matters is being willing to learn, to transform, and to wait for the right moment. That's what will truly define your journey in poker and in life. So, if you've been inspired by Zika's story and feel ready to enter the game, I have a suggestion for you. Start your own journey of transformation. Start observing more, understanding the games you're playing, noticing the nuances of what's happening around you. Don't rush. Don't let yourself be driven by haste or ego. Learn from every mistake and, above all, be patient. Because the greatest reward comes not from winning immediately, but from learning to master the mental and emotional game. That's what will take you further. So, what are you going to do now? You have the cards in your hands. You're at the right moment to make the decision that could change your journey. If you want to learn more about how to apply these strategies, how to deal with the pressures of the game, and how to make your own turnaround, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video with that friend who thinks poker is only for the younger crowd. Because the truth is, it's never too late to learn, and maybe you'll be the next big story of overcoming and transformation. And to leave you with one final thought, how will you prepare for the next big move? The next move is in your hands. Will you be the one to write the next turnaround story? Only you can answer that question, But the important thing is that, when the moment comes, you'll be ready to act.